Alright guys, today's topic, why private schools can be a bad idea, or rather, why sending your kids to private schools can be a bad idea. So the first thing you need to be aware of, number one, is cost. Okay, these days if you send them for private education, the cost can be very, very high. So this is something that I think as families you will sort of need to think about it and sort of plan your finances, because usually when you look at private schools, right, the first thing you do is when you look at the rate cards, you do not just look at the rate card and the pricing as it is. That actually is just a base price, because once you start adding in like extracurricular activities, extra games, the badminton racket, the tennis racket, the running shoes and all that sort of stuff, the price can escalate really, really quickly. And don't forget, every year school fees will just keep escalating. I have never seen any private school where their school rates go down. It can only go upwards. So I think this is really, really important for families, where you really need to start thinking and planning your finances and not just look at it as, okay, how much does it cost a month? And then can I afford it? I'll just do the math, basically one term and then divide it by a month. Okay, I can do it, let's go. That's just the beginning. This is really what we call, just the beginning of it, where you're just starting out, because it will just keep going higher and higher. So as a result of that, I think you need to be very, very careful, because private schools, when you send your kids in, it's very hard for you to pull them out for many reasons, which I don't want to talk about in this episode. However, if you do plan to, you need to really ensure that it is something that you can do long term. And this is something that I've seen, and I've also had conversations with parents where they realize that every semester it's stressful, it's a challenge, because you have to think about school fees. And especially if you not only have one child, let's say you have 2 or 3 kids, then that price is very, very different. So as a result of that, I realized that for families, basically, if you are just literally nose above the water, then it's very tricky, because what's going to happen is that it's very difficult for you to, as a family, or rather as parents, to plan for your retirement. Because there will be a time where, let's say even as adults, where you reach your maximum, or rather your peak earning capacity, and then after a while it tapers off, especially if you grow a bit older and so forth. And that's where you start to think about, do I have enough money for retirement? Do I have enough money for later in life? So I feel sometimes when it comes to, like, let's say sending kids for private education, it can be unnecessarily stressful for the family, because you would have to cut back on certain things, on certain essentials sometimes, number one. Number two, there are also other mixes where you may, as I mentioned, retirement. Number three, even certain things like, for example, you may have to cut back on let's say vacations and holidays and so forth, which again, in today's standard, I feel that vacations and maybe like holidays and all that are no longer like earlier days you find that it's actually a luxury. Well, it depends where you go, of course. If you're heading over to Switzerland or whatever, then maybe it's a bit on the luxury side. But I do feel like a short getaway as a family is actually really important. In most instances, you are working and you also need some time off, and you also need time to recharge and so forth. So sometimes I do see where families, they cut back on that just to be able to ensure that the school fees can be met. So this, personally, I feel that could be unnecessary stress on a family. The second thing I also notice when it comes to, let's say, private school and all that sort of thing, I find that also there is a danger of, let's say, cultivating a sense of entitlement in kids especially, and maybe also parents, I suppose. But kids, what I do realize from private schools, and because it's basically full fee paying education, what happens is that they tend to sort of expect to be treated a certain way. I mean, I have seen some scenarios where the parents insist the kids do not go for their physical education or physical exercise, which is part of the syllabus in school, simply because the parents would say it's too hot out there for the child. And then there is also another case where I've seen where the parent would actually sit in the cafeteria and start really deboning all the chicken and all the food and placing it nicely for the kid. Nothing wrong with that, but I think if your kid is like maybe 10 years old, maybe it's something that you may want to actually let them actually have a bit of independence. So I have seen some of these cases where, especially in private educational institutions, where the parent basically finds it difficult to let go, perhaps, and it creates a lot of sense of entitlement. And personally, to me, I feel that cultivating a sense of entitlement is very, very dangerous in kids, because number one, they tend to lose that sense of empathy, and they are not able to relate to on a different level, or for people from different levels of society. They cannot see it, so it's very, very dangerous. And it also creates where, I'll give you an example. There was a case where we were dining at a Japanese restaurant, in I think that time was Rakuzen, and we were talking to a kid who was from a private education, a private school. And so we were talking and say, do you like Japanese food? And then the kid said, yeah, I like Japanese food, So do your parents bring you to Rakuzen also? And the kid said, oh no, my parents don't bring me to cheap Japanese restaurants. They should bring me elsewhere. So can you imagine? And of course, this is with a straight face. The kid did not know better. So the kid actually said that obviously, it came from somewhere, right? That the parents probably say, oh, this is a cheap Japanese restaurant, we don't want to go there. So it tends to create that sort of sense of entitlement. I'll give you another example. So this is another conversation we had with a kid, and at that time, I think we were walking past like a restaurant, and someone was having a wedding dinner. And so what happened, we said, okay, that's quite nice, it's quite sweet, basically a nice, cozy wedding dinner. And then there was a kid that said, oh, I would never do it here. And of course, I was curious, and I was like, why wouldn't you do it here? Oh, I would never do it in like a restaurant. Of course, it has to be like in a big fancy hotel. So these are things that, again, kids don't realize because they have been basically in a private school, mixing up with also entitled people and all that, and they feel that should be the standard. So not their fault probably, but this is just over years they have basically cultivated that sense of entitlement. So these are some of the things that I have seen over time. And most importantly, I think sometimes private schools, because children have it too easy, they don't get a chance to toughen up. And in life, you have to toughen up. And this is not something that you can actually learn from books. You can read about it, but what's more important is that you have to have that experience, and you have to have that resilience. And sometimes if you give them too much too early, they may not have that chance to grow that shell, that protection, that in other words, just simple language, to toughen up. So that is something that you have to be a bit careful, or rather that's something that I see has occurred a lot in private school. And also another thing that I've noticed is that in most instances, and don't get me wrong here, but I realized that in private schools, a lot of it, the teachers tend to be more afraid of the students than the other way around. Because usually the kids, the parents are like, wealthier or important or VIP parents and so forth. So what happens is that the teachers and even the principals almost do not dare to take action or to punish the child, because they risk basically, number one, the parents coming over, creating a scene, and basically making things very, very difficult for them. And I've also seen that. So it's very, very difficult, because sometimes for children, there has to be a line how to discipline it. I'm not advocating like abuse or anything too, physical or whatever, but there has to be a line drawn where the child knows. So that is something that I find that in private schools, the line is a little bit blurred, and there's almost no boundary. And because of that, sometimes children can be very, very disillusioned. Lastly, what I do realize also is that private schools, although a lot of parents, they do realize that, okay, maybe they get better quality education and so forth. But also, what I do realize is that some parents take private school as almost outsourcing their responsibilities. And I'm not saying all, but a lot of them sort of take it that way, where, here's the money, you handle everything. That means you handle the education, you handle their well-being, you handle everything else. And this is something, honestly, I think the parents are at fault. And what happens is that after that, the kids, because of the long hours and the sense of entitlement, and also parents just dumping money and saying you handle that, the relationship between children, the child and parents, they are strained. And then basically it goes further and further apart. And because of that, right, you have to realize also everything else, you're throwing everything else into the pot. That means long hours, private school, strained relationship. After a while, what happens is that you may not even know what your kids are doing, who they are mixing with, and who they are talking to, and so forth. So personally, I feel as a parent, during the early years, it is really important to develop that relationship and that bond. Because what happens is that once that is not there in the early years, it's very hard to communicate with the child. So there you have it, guys. Those are some of the key reasons why I feel that sending kids to a private school may not be the best idea. So let me know what you think in the comment section below.